Today our conversation will explore how Pakistan's cities are changing, what that means for our future, and why they often fail the people they're meant to serve. So how have urbanization trends transformed Pakistan over the last 20 years?
Well, I think the transformation began much before 20 years. And those trends have continued. They haven't ended. I think the major trend is social, which of course is the result of economic change. The extended family has reduced considerably. The nuclear family has evolved and consolidated, especially in the urban areas. And and that gives a lot of freedom to individuals within a nuclear family. So women can acquire education without pressure from their aunts and uncles, etc., not to have an education. I think also the freedom of marrying whom they want, although this is not consolidated, but the trend is certainly there, even in the low-income groups, that is certainly there. It has also changed settlement patterns, because nuclear families living next to each other is a very different phenomena from extended families living in a neighborhood. So that change has also taken place. But above all, I think in the rural area, because of a change in production patterns, mechanization, fertilizer, middleman economy, the Arif, for example. All this has given rise to an economy where cash is desperately needed, and that cash is not available in the rural areas. The barter economy, which once functioned, is no longer there. So that is a push factor. And then the attraction of a town, especially for young men, recently freed from the oppression of tribal control. I think that is also a great attraction. And then freedom from debt to some extent, because you borrow for marriages, you borrow for an education, you borrow from shops for food, etc. There's a big borrowing economy. That borrowing is easier in an urban setting than in a rural setting. I mean, it's easier in a rural setting, but the amount that you borrow is very limited, whereas you get a much larger sum in the urban areas.
So you're saying that's what pushes them to come towards urban areas?
That is one of the major factors. Education is another big factor. People want their kids educated. And it's easier to get an education, at least primary and secondary education, in the urban areas. Of course, there are problems with it. People don't want to send their children to government schools because they feel that government schools are no good, although they may be free or low cost. They like to send their children to private schools within low-income settlements or middle-income settlements. They are expensive, so they have to take a terrible decision which child to send to school and which to send to work. So this is a big problem which I have come across again and again. So that's one factor. But when you come to universities, there are no universities in poor middle-income settlements. So you have to go far away somewhere to attend university, which means transport costs, which means time, and which means increasing fee for the university. So it becomes extremely difficult. So you have to, again, choose who can go and who cannot go. But in most cases, they do not go. But they would like to push the women into the university with great advantages in that. For one, they get better marriage proposals, which is very important in Pakistan. So that factor is there. Second, you manage to get better jobs. For instance, all these malls that have come up, girls are preferred, but the girls have to be educated. They have to speak English. They should know how to read and write. So that factor comes into it. So education is important, especially for girls. And girls are terrible things. Once they get an education, I'm not joking, I've come across this again and again. Once they get an education, they get a better job than the men, then they boss over the whole household. I've seen that again and again. So yes, society is changing and urbanization has helped to change it.
So one of the questions we have for you here is, how inclusive is the national housing policy at present? And what problems does this pose for the disenfranchised in the society?
Well, I think there is no housing policy for the poor. It's almost entirely the private sector that deals with this. And since the private sector deals with it, the issue of affordability comes into play. And if something is unaffordable, it means it doesn't exist for the poor. So that is the situation. However, we had one program which had the possibility of providing improved living conditions for the people of this country. And that was the Kachi Abadi Improvement and Regularization Program, which meant that settlements that were already there, the people could get a lease, and after getting a lease, they could own that property. Once they own that property and they are secure, then they'd invest in it. And where this did happen, they did invest in it. But the problem was huge. If you look at Karachi, more than half of Karachi's housing has been produced by the informal sector. So what are you going to do with it? If you're going to apply those same old laws कि lease होनी चाहिए, तो नहीं होगी. So what do? Question mark. So you let it go. Make conditions easy. Give ownership of property easily without all these 11 stages and huge number of documents, and which no poor man can do. Asking them to give us a plan of your house, which might take many days getting it through, many visits to officialdom, and being treated with suspicion and aggressiveness. So what happens? A middleman steps in. He takes money and he does this process for you. Now this has happened in many cases, but then the whole lease process comes to an end. Why it comes to an end, I don't know, but it comes to an end. And it stops happening. Also, this is in such large numbers that people think, हमें कौन हटाएगा? इतनी बड़ी and they are right. They could not. Problem number 2, the only space available for the poor is at the city's fringe. Because everywhere else, the real estate takes that land away from the poor, takes the land away from the government. And so they are pushed out onto the periphery or environmentally degraded areas that the rich don't want. Okay. This creates enormous problems. Problem number 1, going to work and coming back. Cost and time. Women working. Children going to school. All these problems arise. So what happens? The old Kachi Abadis, which are near the center of the town when they were built long ago, they become high-rise. The informal sector invests money in that, purchasing those plots from the original owners and going up. So where 10 families or 12 families lived in a place, now you're about 30 families. But the conditions are, the density issues are very serious. Because you have, if you take the center of Karachi or certain working class areas, you might have 8 persons to a room. Even more than that, if it is in 2 or 3 shifts. So the housing conditions are extremely bad. There is no policy. None of these, and that they are serious, and there is a demand for them. You can judge by the fact that every government that comes to power promises many million houses or whatever. But nobody has produced any amount of houses. The People's Party now is producing these one-room houses. Let's see how it works out.
In light of climate change and climate disasters, rapid urbanization, and the growing informalization of economies and population growth, what are some of the most pressing challenges, in your view, that we are facing as a society?
I think in the case of urban areas in Pakistan, the most challenging thing is flooding. We don't know when there will be heavy rainfall, and we don't know when it will happen. And our cities are not meant for taking heavy rains. Also, those cities that are near mountainous areas or hilly areas, like Karachi is, for example, they can receive much more rainfall and much more flooding than just through rainfall. Like the Kitsar range in our neighborhood gives us a lot of water, which our city can't absorb. Now, how can we deal with this? This requires an enormous amount of funds to have a new drainage system that can take this to the sea. But the most serious thing in the case of Karachi is that Karachi's outfalls to the sea cannot take this pressure of water. Before, there was no construction, so the outfall could be huge, it could shrink. It had the possibility to modify itself, which after the construction of housing, like Defence Society, doesn't have the possibility at all. So you go in for pumping, which is expensive. So that's one aspect. The other aspect is really related to heat islands. And over there you need 3 things to deal with it. One, you need insulation, you need cross-ventilation, and you need sufficient external space to accommodate people. Now, we never thought in these terms because these things didn't exist. But now we have to think in these terms. And that's a huge expense also, which the state cannot bear. So you have cheap insulation that people can put up themselves. You have cross-ventilation, which people can put in themselves. So it's principles that they have to know. And second aspect is density. You have to control density. That requires land. And there are major differences in density. Defence Society has a density of about 85 to 100 persons per hectare. Liari has a density of about 2,500 persons per hectare. So this usage of land requires a major land reform, which restricts ownership of land to a certain limit, which has conditionalities on the usage of land, limiting densities. But more important than that, which can easily be done, is a non-utilization fee on land, which will make vacant land available for development, which it isn't at present. You can own as much land as you like and say, I'm not going to pay a penny on it. So these are land reforms, there are various other things as well related to communities and culture.
Okay, so this brings me to my final question to you, which is, despite witnessing repeated cycles of policy failure for 5 decades and more, actually, what gives you hope that the next generation can reshape Pakistan's development paradigm?
I don't know what gives me hope, but without hope you cannot keep working. But what really gives me hope is that this generation, the one which we started calling Gen Z, it's outspoken. It has no respect for its parents, it has no respect for its teachers, and it has no respect for the opinions. So that gives me enormous hope. I think with these qualities, they can think anew, and we need to think anew in a world of new technologies, in a world of anger, mistrust, violence.
Injustice.
So that gives me great hope.